So one of the great things about transactional analysis is the simple theoretical models that Eric Berne put together that help us to understand who we are in the world and how we function in it, and help us to, through that understanding of ourselves and other people, look at different options or different ways of responding. So transactional analysis, and as far as Eric Berne I think thought about it, was very much about awareness leading to options, leading to creativity, leading to as sort of an antidote to stuckness and repetition, if you like. And one of the great theories that Eric Berne put together was this model of ego states. So just to sort of explain this in a little bit more detail and what Berne was thinking about when he came up with this, he noticed that amongst his clients there was a consistent place that his clients seemed to come from. So everything that they would say, everything they would do, everything they would think, and everything that they would feel would often emanate from one place. So when I'm talking about this, I often use the example of, if you imagine you were sitting in the stands at the KC Stadium in Hull, and Hull City score a goal, and you jump out of your seat going, yeah, in support for Hull City, everything you say, everything you do, everything you think and you feel at that moment will be coming from the place, coming from the ego state of you being a Hull City supporter. So you might be a dad or a mum or an employer or an employee or a therapist or a client. You might have a whole host of other roles in your life. But in that moment, everything you say, everything you do, everything you think and everything you feel will be coming from the place of you being a Hull City supporter. So Eric Berne, who put transactional analysis together in the 1950s and 60s in California, didn't probably come across many Hull City supporters, but there were 3 common ego states that he noticed amongst all of his clients. So you might have seen this before. The first one we're going to talk about is P, the parent ego state. So in your parent ego state, we will store significant messages that we heard when we were little, like messages that seem to matter, that seem to carry some weight with them, or ways of behaving, and we'll store them in our parent ego state. So if you've ever found yourself saying to your kids, get upstairs and tidy your bedroom, and then thought, oh my word, that wasn't my voice, that was my dad's or my mum's, the chances are that when you were little, you once heard your mum or dad saying to you, get upstairs and tidy your bedroom, and you thought on some subconscious level, gee whiz, that sounds like a powerful message, I'm going to store that away, and for when I have kids, that might be useful. And this happens out of awareness. This is a subconscious process, but this storing of a whole host of parental messages from our childhood is very much something that happens. So we might also think about what it's like to be on the receiving end of that finger that's saying get upstairs and tidy your room, and do, like, so do we respond as the child with a bit of scare or a bit of shame? Oh, I've got a dirty bedroom, I've not done my chores, mummy and daddy are angry with me, maybe a bit of rebellion, I'm not going to do it. However we would respond to that experience, we would store in our child ego state. So our parent ego state and our child ego state are very much from experiences from our past brought into the here and now. So they come from the past, both of these going this way. And the third ego state, which is particularly important because this is probably the one where we function best, this is called your adult ego state. And in your adult ego state, you are in the here and now. So this is really important. Here and now. This is really important because in the here and now, you have got an appreciation for what's going on around you. And in your parent ego state, you're often not particularly concerned with the context. I don't care how tired you are, you will finish your chores. Oh, I don't care how much you've been practicing this, are you sure you're ready for this job interview? Parent ego messages that don't particularly pay much attention to the here and now. Now in your child ego state, there's often not a lot of appreciation for the consequences of how you'll come across of your actions. So if you think about that child lying face down on the sweetie aisle in the supermarket who is proper having a tantrum, that child does not care how embarrassing they are to mummy or daddy or whoever's taken them shopping. They just want their sweeties and they're just going to have them. So the consequences often don't get taken into consideration in the child ego state, which they do in the adult ego state. So also in the adult ego state, you have access to a whole host of resources that you have now that you perhaps didn't have in the past if you're in your parent or your child ego state. So really we function far better in adult. We engage better with the world, we make better decisions. It's also an okay place, whereas often some people's childhoods were not founded on an okay relationship. It would be great if we'd all had good enough parenting, but many of us have not had, and that is not always the case. So let's have a think about how we might put this into action. I had a client a couple of weeks ago where we used this model and we went through a discussion. So this client was finding he was getting really sort of ratty and disappointed with his wife, who was busy and she had an awful lot of work on, and that was being very distracting for her. So she wasn't giving him a lot of attention in the relationship because she was preoccupied with what she'd got going on at work. So his reaction to this, often he found that he would harass her. He would try to get into what she was doing at work, try to involve himself and tell her what she should or shouldn't be doing and things like this. And it often ended up in rows and disagreements because there was naturally a bit of tension in the relationship anyway. She was stressed with work. The two of them weren't really communicating particularly well. It's not a great foundation for somebody to then come in and start cajoling and prodding and trying to get involved. So I talked to my client about this and I said, does it remind you of anything? And he said, oh yeah, it reminds me of my mum. I said, all right, okay, how come? And he said, well, so if I'd ever done something wrong, my mum wouldn't dish out the punishment for me there and then. She would go away and withdraw. And she would fume and let this punishment fester, and then she'd come back later and she would wind up to giving me the ticking off that I'd earned by being naughty as a little boy by getting involved in every single thing that I do. Like, oh wow, okay. So what was that like for you? So, oh, it was awful. He said, absolutely awful. I hated it. It was just this sort of panic and sense of foreboding and doom coming up. So if we think about this, if I get a different pen and go purple, so if we write this up kind of thing, this guy's child ego state, when his wife appears distant, that reminds him of when his mother would withdraw after he'd done something naughty. So he starts to feel a bit guilty, but doesn't know why, then starts to panic, and then gets this sense of dread. I was like, well, what's that like for you to have that? So I hate it, don't want to think about it at all. Okay, so what do you do instead? I said, I just follow her around the house and just try to get involved in everything that she's doing and give my opinion and what have you. So does that sound a bit like what your mum used to do? So his mum used to hassle him and badger him before she would then punish. So what we've got here is the client in question is experiencing something that he experienced when he was little, being shunned by the woman in his life. When he was little, it was his mum. Nowadays, it's his wife. Now, it's for very different reasons, because she's busy at work and his mum was cross with him for something that he'd done. And all kids are naughty, so... But he goes to this place of, oh, I know what's coming next. I've got to get all this. That's what's going to happen. All these awful feelings that I can't quite contain. So I tell you what I'll do. I'll go to do what my mum used to do in those circumstances, because she always came out on top in that instance when I was little. She always came out on top. So what's happening is we're getting a replaying of this client's past, which is not really serving him very well in his relationship with his wife. And by looking at this, what we're able to do from an adult place is recognise what went on, what he's doing now, and look at some different options as to how he might engage with his wife moving forward, how he might check out with her to see how she's feeling about the relationship, check out whether she's cross with him, check out whether there is a big punishment coming his way, which is all the things that he had when he was little. And he might find that from his wife that no, there isn't, she's just busy at work. And maybe when the two of them can communicate in this different way, they can connect differently and get a different outcome under these circumstances. So this was a really useful piece of work for this client, and it's a particularly useful tool, I think, this piece of theory of ego states, to understand more about who we are and how we interact with other people. What we're storing in our child ego state that's difficult to make contact with, but sometimes leaks out and influences the way we act and decide and behave in the world. What's stored in our parent ego state that does the same sort of stuff, and how much time we actually spend in adult, in the here and now, behaving in an appropriate way, using our resources and an okay philosophy to get on in the world.